Man saves drowning leopard from a well, turns pale when he sees what it's protecting. Ethan's evening began like any other, a walk along the outskirts of his quiet village to clear his mind and enjoy the tranquility of nature. The faint rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets were all the sounds he anticipated. But as he neared the edge of a forgotten field, a sharp, unusual noise broke the stillness. Splashes, desperate and rhythmic, echoing through the crisp air. He paused, unsure if his ears had deceived him. The sound came again, louder this time, a frantic splashing followed by heavy breathing. It was coming from the old well at the far end of the field. Curiosity turned into urgency as Ethan quickened his pace, his heart thudding in his chest. The well was notorious in the village, a crumbling relic from the past, covered in moss and largely ignored for years. Many assumed it was completely dried up, a harmless ruin blending into the landscape. Yet, as Ethan approached, his breath caught. The closer he got, the more he felt a sense of foreboding, the splashing now accompanied by muffled grunts of effort and distress. Reaching the edge, he hesitated before peering in, his instincts warning him of something unusual. He turned on the flashlight on his phone, its narrow beam slicing through the darkness below. His eyes widened in shock as he saw it. A large, powerful figure thrashing in the water, its massive paws clawing at the slimy stone walls of the well. A leopard. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The leopard, usually a symbol of untamed grace, now looked desperate and vulnerable, its sleek body weighed down by mud and water. Its wide eyes gleaming in the light, locked onto Ethan's, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. He was frozen, unsure of what to do as the reality of the situation settled over him. The animal's strength was waning. It was evident in the way its movements slowed with each attempt to climb the slippery walls. If Ethan didn't act, the leopard wouldn't survive. His thoughts raced. There was no one around. The field was isolated, and the nearest homes were at least a mile away. Shouting for help would be futile, and every passing second seemed to drain the animal of its remaining energy. The idea of saving a wild predator felt impossibly dangerous, but doing nothing was out of the question. He forced himself to think clearly, scanning the area around the well for anything that might help. Ethan's eyes darted over the uneven terrain, but the immediate area was barren, save for some scattered planks of wood. He grabbed one, hoping it might be long enough to reach the bottom of the well, but it fell far short, splashing uselessly into the water below. Frustration mounted as he realized how unprepared he was for a crisis like this. He needed something sturdier, something longer, fast. Looking up, Ethan's gaze fell on the dilapidated silhouette of an abandoned house in the distance. The structure, once a proud family home, had been left to decay for decades. Local children spun ghost stories about it, and most villagers avoided it entirely. But Ethan had no time for superstition. If there was a chance of finding something useful inside, he had to take it. He sprinted toward the house, the chilly night air biting at his skin as he ran. Pushing open the heavy creaking door, he was immediately met with a musty, suffocating smell, the air thick with dust and decay. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he moved cautiously through the dimly lit rooms, his phone's flashlight guiding him. Shadows danced on the peeling wallpaper, and every step seemed to echo louder than the last. Ethan descended into the basement, where he hoped to find something overlooked by the previous owners. The space was damp and filled with the remnants of another time, rusty tools, broken furniture, and cardboard boxes disintegrating in the moisture. His heart sank as he rummaged through the debris, finding nothing of immediate use. Rats scurried into the shadows, startled by the intrusion, but Ethan pressed on, determined not to let the leopard's fate rest on his failure. Climbing back up to the ground floor, he noticed a broken window leading to the backyard. The faint outline of a shed caught his attention. It was barely visible through the overgrown weeds and ivy, but the promise of an untapped storage space reignited his determination. He pushed through the tall grass and wrenched open the shed door, its hinges protesting loudly. Inside, the air was even dustier than the house, and spiderwebs hung like curtains across the doorway. Ethan brushed them aside, his eyes scanning the cluttered space. Old gardening tools, rotting wooden crates, and rusty cans were piled in disarray. As he shifted a pile of broken chairs, something in the corner caught his eye, a thick coil of rope partially hidden beneath a tarp. "Yes!" he exclaimed, the sound breaking the oppressive silence. Grabbing the rope, he felt its sturdy weight in his hands and knew it would work. The relief was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. Time was slipping away, and he still had to make it back to the well before it was too late. Ethan sprinted back across the field, the rope slung over his shoulder, and determination etched on his face. In the distance, the faint sounds of splashing continued, weaker now than before. As he approached the well, he could see the leopard's movements slowing, its powerful legs struggling to stay afloat. The animal's heavy breaths were audible even from above, a haunting reminder of how close it was to giving up. With shaking hands, Ethan tied one end of the rope securely around the well's base. His plan was simple, but it was dangerous. He would climb down himself. His heart pounded as he wrapped the other end of the rope around his waist, his palms slick with sweat despite the cold air. Looking down into the darkness, he steeled himself. He didn't know how the leopard would react to his presence, but he couldn't let fear stop him. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, Ethan gripped the rope tightly and began his descent. Ethan gripped the coarse rope with trembling hands, his knuckles whitening as he prepared to lower himself into the abyss. The frayed fibers bit into his palms, a sharp reminder of the risks he was about to take. Above him, the night sky stretched out, vast and indifferent, while below, the ancient well yawned dark and foreboding. The leopard's ragged breaths echoed faintly from the depths, its struggle a constant reminder of the stakes. Ethan swallowed hard, his fear warring with the urgency of the moment. If he hesitated any longer, the leopard might not survive. He positioned himself carefully at the edge of the well, tying the rope securely around his waist. Every knot was checked and double-checked. There would be no second chances if anything went wrong. He glanced down into the darkness, the weak beam of his phone flashlight barely illuminating the slick stone walls and the rippling water below. The leopard's large frame was visible now and then, its movements sluggish as it clung to the last vestiges of energy. Ethan's heart clenched at the sight. He couldn't abandon it, not when he was its only chance. As he began his descent, the cold, damp air of the well enveloped him, its chill sinking into his skin. The rough surface of the rope burned against his palms, and he adjusted his grip constantly to find relief. Each step down was deliberate and slow, his feet searching for crevices in the stone wall to brace himself. The well seemed deeper than it had looked from above, a vertical tunnel of darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. Ethan's breath came in short gasps, the strain of holding his weight making his muscles ache. His arms trembled with the effort, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cold. He risked a glance downward, his flashlight beam catching the leopard's wide eyes. The animal's gaze met his, a mixture of fear and exhaustion etched into its expression. Ethan spoke softly, hoping his voice would somehow reassure the distressed creature. "You're okay," he murmured, his tone steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm coming to help. Just hang on." The leopard gave no indication it understood, but it stopped thrashing for a moment, its body floating limply in the water. Ethan took this as a good sign and continued his descent, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. Halfway down, just as his confidence began to build, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, startling him. The vibration jolted him out of his focus, and for a moment, he almost lost his grip on the rope. He cursed under his breath, frustrated at the timing. The phone buzzed again, a relentless reminder of whoever was trying to reach him. Ethan hesitated, weighing his options. Ignoring the call seemed like the obvious choice. It wasn't exactly the ideal moment to answer, but the persistent buzzing gnawed at him. What if it was something urgent? What if someone needed him as desperately as this leopard did? His thoughts swirled in a chaotic mix of doubt and determination. He decided to act. Wrapping the rope tightly around one wrist to steady himself, he reached into his pocket with the other hand. The movement was awkward and precarious, his weight shifting uncomfortably as he fumbled for the device. His fingers brushed the edge of the phone, but just as he pulled it free, his grip slipped. Time seemed to slow as the phone tumbled from his hand, its screen lighting up briefly as it spun through the air. Ethan could only watch helplessly as it plummeted into the murky water below, the impact creating a small splash that echoed through the well. The leopard flinched at the sound, its body tensing as it growled weakly, a warning to the intruder above. "Damn it!" Ethan muttered, frustration and fear flooding his mind. He could still hear the faint vibration of the phone underwater, a maddening reminder of its uselessness. Now, the sudden loss of his lifeline to the outside world was a sobering blow, but he forced himself to refocus. The leopard was still there, still alive, and still waiting for him to do something. He adjusted his grip on the rope and resumed his descent, his movement slower and more cautious than before. The muscles in his hands and arms screamed in protest, and he could feel the beginnings of rope burn on his palms. The cold, damp air seemed to sap his strength with every passing second, but he pushed through, his determination outweighing his physical discomfort. As he neared the bottom, the water's chill seeped into his senses, amplifying the already oppressive atmosphere. The sound of his labored breathing mingled with the faint splashes of the leopard's movements, creating a haunting symphony in the confined space. Ethan's legs trembled as they finally found purchase on the slick, uneven stones submerged beneath the water. The water reached his hips, its icy grip stealing the breath from his lungs. He shivered uncontrollably, the cold a sharp contrast to the heat of his exertion. His feet shifted in the muck at the bottom of the well, the sensation of slippery stones and unseen debris adding to his unease. Standing there, face to face with the leopard, he felt the full weight of what he was attempting. The animal's size was intimidating, its powerful body visibly trembling with exhaustion, but still brimming with potential danger. Ethan kept his movements slow and deliberate, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "We'll get out of here, both of us." The leopard stared at him, its chest heaving with each labored breath. Its eyes were wide and unblinking, watching him with a mixture of wariness and vulnerability. Ethan could see the layers of mud and grime clinging to its fur, the evidence of its struggle written all over its body. Despite the overwhelming fear, Ethan felt a strange sense of connection to the creature. In this confined space, their roles as predator and human seemed to blur. They were simply two beings, trapped in the same dire circumstances, each relying on the other to make it out alive. Ethan carefully shifted his position, his mind racing with the next steps. He knew he couldn't climb back up with the leopard on his own. It was far too dangerous, and he lacked the strength to pull them both out. He needed a new plan, one that would give them both a chance at survival. But first, he needed to earn the leopard's trust. The water rippled gently as he took a cautious step closer, his eyes never leaving the animal's. Every movement was calculated, every breath steady, as he tried to convey calm and safety. The leopard's ears twitched, its body tense but not aggressive. Ethan interpreted this as a fragile truce, a temporary understanding that neither would harm the other. It was a start, and for now, that was enough. Ethan stood waist deep in the frigid water, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he tried to steady himself. The well's dark walls closed in around him, amplifying the quiet, yet palpable tension between him and the exhausted leopard. The animal's chest rose and fell in heavy, uneven breaths, its body shivering in the cold. Its eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, watched Ethan intently, flickering between fear and exhaustion. he felt the weight of its gaze, as if the leopard were silently assessing his intentions. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the faint rippling of the water. Ethan kept his movements slow and deliberate, every step carefully measured to avoid startling the creature. Though weakened, the leopard was still a predator, its powerful claws and teeth capable of inflicting devastating injuries. Yet, as Ethan moved cautiously closer, he noticed something peculiar about its behavior. Instead of retreating or baring its teeth, the leopard shifted slightly, turning its body to shield something behind it. Ethan froze, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of the movement. The leopard's stance was protective, its body curved almost instinctively around whatever it was guarding. His flashlight, clutched tightly in his hand, cast a faint beam across the water, illuminating small ripples that seemed to radiate from the leopard's position. "What are you hiding?" Ethan murmured, his voice low and soothing, more to himself than to the animal. The leopard didn't respond. Of course it didn't. But its tense posture spoke volumes. "Sea stuff." Slowly, Ethan adjusted the angle of his flashlight, the beam skimming over the murky surface of the water. At first, he saw nothing but shifting reflections and debris. Then, his heart stopped. There, barely visible against the dark, muddy background, was a small, trembling form. Ethan squinted, disbelief washing over him as the shape became clearer. It was a kitten, a tiny, soaking wet kitten, its fur matted and its body huddled in the shallowest part of the water. The leopard's massive paw rested protectively near the kitten, its claws retracted, as if to shield the fragile creature from harm. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He blinked, convinced his eyes were deceiving him, but the scene before him didn't change. The kitten, no larger than a loaf of bread, let out a faint, pitiful mew, its small body shivering violently. It was alive, barely, but alive nonetheless. For a moment, Ethan was paralyzed, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. A leopard, a wild predator, had not only tolerated the presence of this tiny, defenseless creature, but had actively protected it. The sheer improbability of it all left him stunned. His earlier fear of the leopard now mingled with a deep, overwhelming respect. "You're looking after it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the faint sounds of the well. "You're protecting it." The leopard's gaze flicked to Ethan, then back to the kitten. Its body remained tense, but there was no aggression in its eyes, only an unspoken warning to tread carefully. Ethan nodded, as if acknowledging the silent command. "All right," he said softly. "We'll do this together." His immediate impulse was to reach for the kitten, but he quickly realized how foolish that would be. Any sudden movement might provoke the leopard, shattering the fragile trust between them. Instead, he crouched slightly, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. He spoke again, his tone calm and measured, hoping the sound of his voice would reassure the animal. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "I just want to help." The leopard didn't move, but its breathing slowed slightly, a faint sign that it was relaxing, or at least not escalating. Encouraged, Ethan began to scan the area for a way to retrieve both the kitten and the leopard safely. The rope tied around his waist was sturdy, but it wasn't long enough to serve as a makeshift harness for the leopard, let alone support the added weight of the kitten. As he pondered his options, he noticed the kitten shifting slightly, its tiny body trying to nestle closer to the leopard for warmth. The sight tugged at Ethan's heartstrings. How long had the two of them been down here? How had the kitten survived at all? The questions churned in his mind, but he pushed them aside, focusing instead on the immediate challenge. The flashlight beam flickered, and Ethan's stomach tightened. The battery was dying, its weak glow threatening to plunge them all into total darkness. He clenched his jaw, realizing he had even less time than he thought. He needed to think fast. "Okay," he muttered under his breath, glancing at the leopard and kitten again. One step at a time. Moving as slowly as possible, Ethan shifted his weight, adjusting the rope around his waist to free his hands. He extended one hand toward the kitten, palm down, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. The leopard watched him closely, its ears twitching, but its body remaining still. "That's it," Ethan murmured, his voice steady. "Just let me get a little closer." The kitten mewed again, its tiny cry barely audible. Ethan's heart ached at the sound, and he fought the urge to rush forward. He inched closer, the icy water sending shivers up his spine. His outstretched hand hovered just a few inches from the kitten, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, the leopard's paw shifted, its claws flexing slightly. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. He held his position, refusing to retreat but not daring to advance. The leopard's eyes bore into him, a silent warning. Seconds stretched into eternity as the two of them stared at each other, locked in a silent standoff. Finally, the leopard relaxed, its paw settling back into the water. Ethan let out a slow, measured exhale, his chest heaving with relief. Carefully, he reached out again, this time managing to brush his fingers against the kitten's damp fur. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "I've got you." The kitten let out a weak, trembling sound as Ethan scooped it up, cradling its fragile body in his hands. It was impossibly light, its tiny frame shivering violently in the cold. Ethan tucked it gently against his chest, shielding it from the water as best he could. The leopard watched him, its eyes narrowing slightly, but showing no signs of aggression. For a moment, Ethan felt a strange sense of mutual understanding pass between them, a silent acknowledgement of their shared goal. With the kitten secure, Ethan shifted his focus back to the leopard. The real challenge was just beginning. He still had to find a way to get them all out of the well, and time was running out. The faint glow of his dying flashlight cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, a haunting reminder of the darkness that awaited if he failed. Ethan tightened his grip on the kitten, his resolve hardening. No matter how impossible the task seemed, he wouldn't leave them behind. He would find a way. He had to. Ethan stood in the icy water, clutching the tiny, trembling kitten against his chest. Its frail body shivered violently, a reminder of how fragile life could be. The leopard, its massive frame towering over him even in its weakened state, remained close, watching his every move. The dim glow of his flashlight flickered ominously, the battery nearing its end. In the suffocating darkness of the well, Ethan felt the weight of their collective plight pressing down on him, like the heavy stones that surrounded them. He tightened his grip on the kitten, instinctively shielding it from the cold water and the faint breeze filtering down the well shaft. Every second mattered now. His muscles ached from the climb down, and his hands were raw from the rope. But the real challenge was still ahead. He had to figure out how to get them all out. Himself, the kitten, and the leopard, without anyone getting hurt or worse. Ethan glanced up at the faint circle of moonlight above. It seemed impossibly far away, the rescue he so desperately needed, feeling just as distant. His mind raced through possible solutions, but none seemed viable. The rope around his waist wasn't strong enough to support the leopard's weight, and he didn't have any equipment to construct a makeshift harness. His phone, the lifeline to the outside world, was somewhere in the muddy water, buzzing faintly for a few moments before falling silent. The realization that he couldn't call for help gnawed at him, but he forced himself to stay focused. Panic wouldn't help anyone now. The leopard shifted slightly, drawing Ethan's attention. It didn't growl or move aggressively, but its body remained tense, coiled like a spring ready to snap if provoked. Its gaze flicked from Ethan to the kitten, then back to him, as if silently reminding him of the stakes. Ethan nodded to himself, acknowledging the fragile understanding between them. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice soft and steady. "We'll get out of here, I promise." The words felt hollow in the face of their predicament, but saying them aloud gave Ethan a renewed sense of determination. He had to believe in the possibility of rescue, even if the odds were stacked against them. Just then, The faintest sound reached his ears, a distant rumble, barely discernible over the stillness of the night. Ethan froze, straining to listen. It grew louder, a low hum that gradually resolved into the unmistakable wail of sirens. Relief flooded through him, his chest heaving as he exhaled. Pluck a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Someone must have seen him heading toward the well, or heard the commotion and called for help. The sound of the sirens grew closer, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Help was coming. But the challenge wasn't over yet. He needed to ensure the leopard remained calm during the chaos of the rescue. The noise and lights could easily provoke the animal into a panic, turning an already dangerous situation into a catastrophe. The leopard's ears twitched at the distant sound, its body stiffening as it instinctively sensed the approaching disturbance. Ethan reached out a hand, palm down, in a gesture of reassurance. "Stay with me," he said softly, his tone soothing. "It's going to be loud, but they're here to help us. You just have to trust me." The animal didn't respond, of course, but its breathing slowed slightly, its gaze steady on Ethan. It was as if the leopard could sense his sincerity, the unspoken bond between them holding firm in the face of their shared ordeal. Moments later, beams of light pierced the darkness from above. The harsh illumination startled the leopard, which recoiled slightly, its massive claws digging into the stone wall for support. Ethan shielded the kitten from the glare, squinting against the sudden brightness. "Ethan!" a voice called from above, echoing down the well. "Are you down there? Are you okay?" "Yes!" he shouted back, his voice hoarse but filled with relief. "There's a leopard and a kitten down here with me. We all need help." The response was immediate. "We're setting up the rescue equipment now. Stay where you are and keep calm." Ethan could hear the clatter of metal and the shuffling of feet as the rescue team prepared their gear. The noise was overwhelming in the confined space, each clang and shout amplified tenfold. He glanced at the leopard, whose ears flattened against its head as it let out a low, uneasy growl. "Easy," Ethan said, his voice a quiet counterpoint to the chaos above. "They're not going to hurt you, I promise." He kept speaking softly, a steady stream of reassuring words that seemed to have a calming effect on both the leopard and himself. Despite the situation, he felt a strange sense of clarity, as if the bond he'd formed with the wild animal had given him a new perspective on trust and survival. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the rescue team worked tirelessly to secure the well's perimeter. Ropes and pulleys were lowered, and a team member descended slowly, their harness clinking against the stone walls. Ethan held his breath as the rescuer approached, their flashlight cutting through the gloom. The leopard tensed again, its body coiled in a defensive posture. Ethan stepped closer to the animal, positioning himself as a barrier between it and the rescuer. "It's okay," he said, his voice firm but calm. "I won't let them hurt you." The rescuer paused a few feet above, assessing the situation. "We're going to lower a harness for the leopard first," they said. "Once it's secure, we'll lift it out. Can you help us keep it calm?" "I'll try," Ethan replied, "but be careful. It's been through a lot." The harness was lowered carefully, the rope swaying slightly as they neared the water. Ethan reached out to steady it, his movements slow and deliberate. The leopard eyed the contraption warily, its growl low and continuous. "It's okay," Ethan said again, directing his words at the animal. "This is going to get you out of here." With painstaking care, he guided the harness toward the leopard, his hands trembling slightly as he worked. The animal hesitated, its instincts battling against its exhaustion. But as Ethan maintained his calm demeanor, the leopard finally relented, allowing the harness to be secured around its body. The moment it was ready, the rescue team began the slow process of lifting the leopard out of the well. Ethan watched anxiously, his heart pounding as the animal ascended inch by inch. The leopard's eyes remained locked on his, a silent connection that seemed to transcend the divide between their species. When the leopard finally reached the surface, a cheer erupted from the team above. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, but his work wasn't done. He still held the kitten, its tiny body now limp with exhaustion, but still breathing. The harness was lowered again, this time for him and the kitten. Ethan secured the kitten against his chest and slipped into the harness, his body trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. As they were lifted out of the well, the cold air gave way to the warm glow of floodlights and the welcoming faces of the rescue team. When Ethan finally stepped onto solid ground, the kitten still cradled in his arms, he was met with a mixture of cheers and relieved sighs. The leopard, now being carefully handled by wildlife experts, turned its head to look at him one last time. Their eyes met, and Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude and understanding pass between them. He had saved it, yes, but in a way it had saved him too.